I'm Bill Hare, and this is why 1.5 degrees is backed by science. We haven't actually reached the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree warming limit, but we're very, very close. 2023 and 2024 were about 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial on an annual average. The Paris Agreement's warming limit is basically a 20 or 30-year average, so we haven't got there yet, but the extreme warming of the last few years, getting close to 1.5 degrees for a few years in a row, is a really big warning sign for the planet. Most of the warming actually in the last decades has been due to human-induced climate change. That is, to the addition of principally carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning, but also other gases like methane from agriculture. So almost totally due to human-induced activity. If we don't take enough action and warming goes above 1.5 degrees, that's called overshoot. The higher the overshoot and the longer the overshoot, the worse it is. This is the magnitude and duration of overshoot. So any increment of warming above 1.5 degrees, like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 degrees, would be an increasingly dangerous level of overshoot of 1.5. And we would want to have that overshoot reduced as rapidly as possible. In other words, reduce the duration of overshoot. So already the lack of action to date may have locked us into significant overshoot for many decades. Should overshoot occur at scale, it would be a major policy failure. It would be a real disaster for climate action globally, and it should create major political pressure for countries to step up action because the consequences of overshoot are quite severe. So the consequences of overshooting 1.5 degrees by a few tenths of a degree and for many decades are going to be potentially the complete loss of our coral reefs. They're going to be potentially causing the major loss of ice from the West Antarctic or another ice sheet, locking in many meters of sea level rise. They're going to include really extreme heat, the growth of regions of lethal heat very substantially, probably affecting 25–40% of the world's population. We're going to see ecosystem collapses. We're going to see loss of glaciers that wouldn't otherwise have been lost. There's going to be a multitude of problems that occur with sustained warming above 1.5 degrees that will be far more severe than if we limited warming to 1.5 in the first place. Some of the impacts of overshoot might be reversible. If you get warming down again, then hopefully you would see the prevalence or emergence of heat extremes reduced quickly. Exceeding 1.5 degrees will create major problems for small island states. And the first thing to say, though, is that already at 1.5 degrees, many small island developing states are suffering from global warming. They're suffering from an increased frequency or intensity of tropical hurricanes, tropical cyclones. They're suffering from increased heat waves. They're suffering from water and drought risks and all of the consequential, more complex things that come from that. So already this is happening at 1.5 degrees. Now above that, those kind of risks accelerate, right? So some of them can grow quite quickly, particularly the risks from heat extremes, drought, tropical cyclone intensity become rapidly worse. And that also creates challenges for the small island states to adapt. Already we know even at close to 1.5 degrees, adaptation options are expensive, they're slow, and often not as effective as we would like them to be. But we know from the scientific community's work and our own scientific work that it gets even harder to adapt the hotter you get. Now, the risks to least developed countries, and there's a range of least developed countries, for example, West Africa, very much dependent on the West African monsoon for agriculture, low-lying coastal cities as well, affected by sea level rise. Others are mountain states, like Nepal or Bhutan, etc., very badly affected by the rapidly dwindling glaciers of that region and the consequential damages that come from glacial lake outburst floods. Now, these are already causing significant problems to more or less a degree. West African agriculture, for example, to take that LDC context, is already experienced significant damages to its agricultural potential, whether it's growing crops or livestock, heat, drought, causing major problems already for people's survival. Warming above 1.5 degrees is going to rapidly make those situations worse. And also increasingly expose populations in these regions to lethal heat.